Whoa, that was something else. Keyshawn Davis just totally dispatched Denise Berinchyk in 4 rounds. I know most people, the vast majority of people thought that Keyshawn Davis would win this. And it was really a question of how competitive and how close would the fight be. A lot of people thought that this might look like a 7 rounds to 5, 8 rounds to 4 type of fight. But, that Keyshawn Davis and, the class of fighter that he is and the stage of his career that he's currently in contrasted with Denise Berinchyk being, 36 years old, deep Olympic pedigree, just beat Emmanuel Navarrete, but Navarrete's probably in over his head at 135. I feel like he kind of physically tops out at 130. But when the rubber hit the road here, this was a non-competitive matchup. Like, I picked Keyshawn Davis to win via decision. I gave a lot of benefit of the doubt to Denise Berinchy's craft, just his overall fight IQ, even his hand speed. And if you look at his foot placement and foot movement, especially against Navarrete, you're like, physically, athletically, this guy is no slouch. Wow, I'm passing this accident where the person knocked over a whole light post. Jesus. Man, I hope they're okay. How do you knock over a light post? And I'm talking about like one of those big, kind of thick light posts, not one of the, street sweepers here from this time to this time. But yeah, I hope they're okay. But Keyshawn Davis showed up and showed out. Like, this was another career best performance. These back-to-back last fights versus Gustavo Lemos and now against Denise Berinchyk, this is totally elevating a lot of people's ceiling that they might have had on Keyshawn Davis. I know that, from the onset, I wasn't a huge believer in Keyshawn Davis. I thought that he was really good. You could see that he was, very skilled, and he was obviously with an extremely talented camp and team. But I thought that because he was, training with Terrence Crawford and Shakur Stevenson, that maybe his reputation was inflated just a bit, where it's almost like since Terrence Crawford is this good, then, and Shakur Stevenson trains with Terrence Crawford, then Shakur Stevenson should be about that good. And since Keyshawn Davis is training with both of them, that means that he should be in that ballpark as well. It's not always the case. But I had also seen a few Keyshawn Davis fights where it looked like the fight kind of hit a malaise where, yes, Keyshawn Davis is still winning the rounds, but he's not doing anything to separate himself or from his opponent or to really put his foot on the gas. Yes, some of that is because some of his opponents, ended up fighting survivalist fights, and it's just hard to get somebody out of there whose mission is to make it to the end of the fight. If they start moving, holding, just kind of making it an ugly fight and doing anything that they can to stay away from your punches distance-wise or to come in and smother your punches, it is pretty damn difficult, even for elite fighters, to find stoppages in those instances. But, between the Miguel Magdueno fight, the Nahir Albright fight, there were just a few Keyshawn Davis fights where I'm like, yeah, he's good, but I don't think that he's necessarily special or that he's going to be a top tier elite, unified champion. And, I didn't think he was going to put it like this. When I look at Abdullah Mason, the first time I saw Abdullah Mason, like several fights ago, I'm like, yeah, I get it. I see it. I see something that's potentially special. Like, if Abdullah Mason, if he's got a chin and he's able to handle different styles and handle, sustained pressure, intelligent pressure over time, if he's able to do that, and again, he's durable enough physically where he's got a chin and can take a decent punch, yeah, Abdullah Mason is going to be a problem. And it only takes one Abdullah Mason fight to watch to say, yeah, I see the hand speed. I see that hook. I see the appetite for destruction. Yeah, I could see Abdullah Mason developing into a pretty special fighter. I didn't see that. I didn't see the attributes jump off the page with Keyshawn Davis earlier in his career. But I've got to tell you, after these last 2 performances, that totally changes my idea of what's possible with Keyshawn Davis. Again, he was in there with a really good fighter in Denise Berinchyk, and no, Denise Berinchyk he's not a future Hall of Famer. He's not necessarily like a bona fide top 5 guy in the division, even if he was a belt holder. But he fought for a vacant title against, again, a former 122, 126, 130 guy who was trying to win a belt in a 4th division. So, sometimes you could find yourself in a advantageous or a fortuitous spot in earning a belt. So yeah, Denise Berinchyk, he wasn't like a bona fide proven, pound for pound guy anywhere near that, but he wasn't a bum either. And again, he had a lot of things from, pretty good hand speed to foot speed to a lot of timing issues where he throws a punch to punctuate the end of exchanges. There's just a lot of things that he did well. None of that mattered against Keyshawn Davis. Like, you could tell, like, by the end of the first round, beginning of the second round, the only way Berinchyk was going to drag this out a few rounds was by basically making it a dirty looking fight. Like, I'm not calling him a dirty fighter, but you saw a lot of those near head clashes, and you saw him trying to jump in and kind of engaging in a lot of wrestling. Yes, it was Keyshawn Davis who kind of threw him a bit in one of those moments, but it was Berinchyk who was uncomfortable with the distances and the ranges that Keyshawn Davis was dictating. There was not a moment in that fight where Berinchyk looked settled in and settled down. And a lot of that is, again, because Keyshawn Davis would take a step back to basically say, no, the fight is going to be fought under these terms. At this range, if we come in here, I can sidestep, I can move you and then sidestep, because Keyshawn Davis has those couple inches in height and reach to where he could get a lot of leverage into those body shots once he dictates the spacing. And he's got that moment of opportunity to let that punch go. And you saw that that's eventually what sunk Berinchyk in the fourth round. You saw his wide base, legs-wise, like the distance between his legs, and how Keyshawn Davis was putting torque into a lot of those punches. And even the part of the glove that was landing in a couple of those body shots, including the fight finishing body shot. It wasn't, this knuckle, the second and third, it wasn't knuckles 1 through 3. It was like knuckles 3 through 4, over here, plus some of the wrist. Like, he was really just kind of digging in with that body shot. And Berinchyk said, I'm out of here. So, yeah, this was a sensational performance for Keyshawn Davis. He looks like he's the real deal, and, I mean, he's got a lot of charisma on the mic after the fights. He's very open about his story, and he looks like he's dead set on wanting to fight anybody at the top of the lightweight division. And there is not a fighter who I don't think he's ready for, and that I wouldn't want to see him fight in the division. Now, I know him and Shakur Stevenson are boys, so we're not going to get Shakur Stevenson versus Keyshawn Davis. We already knew that. But I'm talking about Gervonta Tank Davis. I wouldn't make Keyshawn Davis the favorite. I wouldn't make him the favorite. There's just no margin for error against Gervonta Davis. And he's got otherworldly, ultra power where he could finish the fight at any moment. You can't say that about all fighters. That's a very special thing. You're born with that. But I would still like to see the fight. I know that, when Gervonta Davis isn't badly hurting Keyshawn Davis, that there's a decent likelihood that Keyshawn Davis could be winning that round. Not to say that Gervonta Davis is like a feast or famine style fighter. It's not like he's, either knocking you out or losing the round like Deontay Wilder. But Keyshawn Davis has enough craft to where he's able to fill in those gaps of less activity, lower volume, and win the sweet science battle between the two. So I do think that Keyshawn Davis belongs in the ring with Gervonta Davis. Whether or not he wins, again, is another question. But I think that he is on the cusp of becoming a boxing star. So we'll see, how they matchmake for him next. I hope that it's not, something that's super promotional based and he's only going to be fighting somebody or defending his, his newly won WBO lightweight belt against, Raymond Murataya. Not that that's a bad fight. I would actually like to see Keyshawn Davis versus Murataya, and I would love to see Murataya get a shot. But I just want, I want some Turkey a la Sheik intervention when it comes to certain careers like Keyshawn Davis at this point. And we're going to get into other top-ranked fighters who I would like the same, for as well. Xander Zayas was on the undercard. He just passed his, step-up test. And, I hope that he's not, limited to the narrow and shallow roster of 154 guys on Top Rank. In certain divisions, certain fighters who are on certain promotions, they are victims of that promotion having a shallow roster in that division. And I think that that's the case right now with Xander Zayas. So I hope that we get Turkey intervention with his career and with one of his next upcoming fights. But yeah, Keyshawn Davis is the real deal. I do have to adjust the ceiling that I kind of internally place on him based on those, kind of lackluster performances that I've seen of him in the past. But no, Keyshawn Davis is like exceeding his expectations, in these last couple of fights, and that's always fun to watch. That part of the fighter's career trajectory where they just seem to be taking off with spectacular, sensational performances, and I think that's where we are with Keyshawn Davis next. Can't wait to see who they match up the new WBO champ with. And before we get into Jack Catterall versus Arnold Barboza, I just want to make mention, Jared Big Baby Anderson was on this undercard, on the top rank, Keyshawn Davis versus Berinchyk undercard, and he did not look good. He was, in for the first time, since his stoppage loss against Martin Bakole. So, I didn't think that he was necessarily going to look his best and most confident, but that's what this fight was about. But everything from his performance, I mean, he got hurt badly early in the fight. It looked like he got hurt badly in the final round of the 10-rounder. So he got hurt early and late by a win some, lose some type of journeyman. You're not supposed to be having these kinds of fights against this type of guy. And you're supposed to, if you are of that elite or near elite ilk, you're supposed to start separating yourself from him on the scorecards. And yeah, this was a very uninspired performance for Jared Anderson. So, maybe this was just the shake the rust off fight and he looks way better in his next fight, but I don't see a lot of evidence that it's going to go that way for him. I just don't. Like, the punch absorption issue, I think, is an issue. I think that he's making the same defensive flaws that he's made throughout much of his career, his young career. But remember, this guy was supposed to be billed as like the next American boxing star. And yes, I mean, anybody can have a huge setback at any moment. That's kind of what the name of the game. I mean, that's what boxing's about more often than not. But you would want to see a bounce back. I remember Vladimir Klitschko getting stopped by, Ross Purity, Corey Sanders, Layman Brewster. But he still went on to have a dominant, generational, great career. A setback shouldn't define you. But, when I'm listening to Jared Anderson talk with his corner, who I don't know if they've been with him for much of his career, but when I hear his conversation after the first or second round and hearing him talk about how he's uncomfortable with this fight going several rounds, how he doesn't want this to go long, how this guy is, pretty tough, and when his corner's telling him to, go to the body, he's kind of explaining why he can't go to the body, talking about, the elbows there to block the body or something like that. It was very, he sounded very vulnerable, very uncertain, and it sounded like he's got some real confidence issues. And I don't know, he just seems like the type who might panic in there when things get really tough. I mean, I know we had seen him hurt against Charles Martin a couple fights ago, and he's been very vocal about not wanting a long boxing career. He said he wanted to be retired by, 27? I think he's like in his mid-20s now, and he doesn't want to fight past like 27. I think that was the age, but that was before the setback. So now that he's had like a brutal loss to Bakole, and now he's clearly not having a good time in there, even against lesser opposition, I don't know how much more we're going to even see of Jared Big Baby Anderson. Like, I don't like how this ride is going at this juncture, and I'm not seeing a lot of evidence that it's going to change course and go a different direction. So yeah, this was a very, lackluster performance. The guy wasn't doing anything sensational defensively to stop Jared Anderson, from firing on him and putting some heavy offense on him. But it looked like, his opponent was largely pushing the pace in much of this fight. And it looked like Jared Anderson was just doing just enough to outwork him in just enough moments to win a lackluster, uninspired decision against this guy. And, I don't know who I would favor Jared Anderson against in like the top 10. I don't know if there's anybody in the top 10 who I'd favor him against. Even 11 through 15, like if you look at like F.A. Ajagba or Guido Vianello, who's about to fight Richard Torres. That should be interesting. But like Richard Torres, Richard Torres was fighting on a lot of Big Baby Anderson undercard. And if you would have asked me 2 years ago who would win between the two, I would say probably Big Baby Anderson. Now, I don't think so. At least not where they are in their respective careers right now. I don't have confidence in Jared Big Baby Anderson beating any, elite or near elite top 15 to 18 heavyweight. It's not good. So it'll be interesting to see if they continue to kind of slow pedal his return against another, like Gorman or somebody like that. Like, I wouldn't want to see him in against even somebody who just came off a loss. Frank Sanchez. Would you favor Big Baby to beat Frank Sanchez right now? I don't think I would. So yeah, stay tuned on that career. But yeah, I didn't like what I saw out of this latest Jared Big Baby Anderson performance. And then there's Jack Catterall versus Arnold Barboza. That was on DAZN. That was a UK fight. Jack Catterall was the favorite, but I think most were in agreement that this should be a close fight. I know I picked Catterall to win like a split decision. I said I wouldn't be surprised by a draw, but I thought that going into the scorecard, it would be a lot of, ooh, who won this one? Just because of their respective sweet science styles, even though their sweet science styles differ from one another. I thought that this would be a close fight, and it was a close fight. In the first few rounds, it looked like Jack Catterall was about to just pull away with it. I thought he won like the first 2 or 3 rounds, maybe the first 2, and then I think that Barboza probably won the 3rd round. But it looks like there's this issue with Jack Catterall because he was like he looked like the quicker reflex guy, right? Where they would just have the quick draw exchanges, and Catterall would have the better counterpunching, the southpaw, the angles, and he would catch Barboza pretty cleanly. But Barboza was willing to throw like 3 to 4 punch combinations, whereas Catterall was kind of settling for like 1s and 2s. But Catterall was looking pretty damn good, again, early in the fight. But I feel like his undoing, at least in this case, and we've seen it in certain instances before, even, I guess, late in the first Josh Taylor fight. Because remember, Catterall's now beaten Josh Taylor in the rematch. Most thought that he beat Josh Taylor in their first fight, and he's now beaten Regis Prograis. So he had a lot of momentum going into this fight against Barboza. Barboza was also coming off a really good win against Jose Ramirez, beat him by decision. That's only Jose Ramirez's 2nd loss. So both of these guys were carrying some good momentum in, even though Barboza 2 fights ago struggled, and I thought that he should have lost against Sean McComb, but they gave him the decision win. Sean McComb was a southpaw, as is Jack Catterall. But again, Catterall was looking good early, but sometimes he just doesn't let his punches go enough. And again, that's what I thought plagued him, and that's what allowed Josh Taylor to really get back into the fight and to, win that disputed decision. Sometimes he just doesn't throw enough punches. There are too many moments of inactivity. And one of the things that I said in my preview was, I think that one of the things that's gonna make this fight really close is Barboza's ability to fill in some of that blank space with a jab, with a jab to the body, with, you could call it busy work, where you're not necessarily hurting the guy, but you're racking up some points, you're scoring points. And in those moments where Jack Catterall, who's, fittingly nicknamed the Cat, because he sets traps and he's just kind of taking a step back, then he uncoils a couple really quick counters, very accurate counters. But I was wondering what those blank spaces were going to do to the scorecards, because when they do exchange, when they both throw, if Catterall's getting the better of those exchanges, but then he takes too long to get going with another combination again, and in the meantime Barboza's staying busy with his jab and just trying to get in range to let something go, to let something, whether it's meaningful or non-meaningful, but to let something go. What is that going to do with the scoring? And there was also a lot of question on, even if it looks like Barboza earned or should have earned a close decision, whether the scoring in this British venue is going to go Barboza's way. There was some of that question as well. But I think that they got the decision right. This was a split decision win for Arnold Barboza, picking up it was a slight upset. It's funny, I ran a poll on YouTube and it was way more skewed towards Catterall. It was like 70-something%. I was looking at the odds because I think that Catterall was like a greater than 2-to-1 favorite. I'm thinking you might want to bet on Barboza here, because this, going into it, seemed like it was a 50-50-ish fight. Even if you would give Catterall a slight lean as a favorite, this decision doesn't surprise me one bit. But I was impressed because, again, I thought that after 2 rounds, it was looking like Catterall was more or less having his way. But Barboza just had more of a sustained attack, a consistent attack through the middle rounds, through the 8 rounds. He was just doing more than maybe in any given exchange, Catterall looks like the more talented puncher, but the consistency and the fact that athletically, if Catterall was a slightly better athlete, which I don't know, Barboza was more or less right there. Plus, Barboza had a couple inches in height and a couple inches in reach. So that coupled with, Barboza's a sweet science fighter as well. There were certain ranges where maybe Catterall didn't feel comfortable throwing the punch in that moment, and Barboza was able to score another point in that moment, which would then get Catterall to feel like he's got to react because Barboza just scored a point, and maybe Barboza was anticipating that get back attempt and then would have something ready for that. So yeah, I was impressed with Barboza's boxing here. I think that he deserved a slight decision win. And if you look at the the unofficial scores in that broadcast, it was like Dalton Smith, Ishmael Davis, and Liam Smith. They all had their respective scorecards, and they were all, I think it ended up being like either a majority draw, but one of the judges, I think it was Ishmael, still had Catterall winning. And I'm like, I hope that the actual judges don't reflect that slight, like, that don't seem right. It didn't seem like that would have been an accurate score. Again, it was a close fight, but I really did think that Barboza earned that one. And I like Catterall. I like this ride that he's been on. He's been the underdog. It sucks to see him suffer this setback, because I thought that he deserved another title shot after he beat Josh Taylor in that rematch, and then definitely after you beat the two-time former champ Regis Prograis. I thought that he should have had another title shot by then, but no, he had to get through one more test, and he didn't pass this one against Arnold Barboza. So it is what it is. And this is such a stacked division, so it's going to be interesting to see if Barboza in fact does get this Teofimo Lopez fight next. And it's just such a talent-rich division. Depending on what happens with, Ryan Garcia and Devin Haney, because they're both fighting their next fight at 147 with Devin Haney against Jose Ramirez. So Jose Ramirez, I don't know if he's going to come back down to 140. And then, Raleigh Romero against Ryan Garcia, they're fighting, I believe, at 147. So I don't know if either of them are going to come back ever to 140, especially because Ryan Garcia has had weight issues in the past in most of his recent fights. But even outside of them, Regis Prograis still around, Josh Taylor's still around. You've got Teofimo Lopez. You've got Isaac Pitbull Cruz, who I don't love his chances at 140, especially against some of the better boxers. I feel like Pitbull physically tops out at 135. You saw that fight that Pitbull was just in. Anybody could have won. That was a very close, rough and tumble fight. He took way too many punches, and it doesn't look like his really good power at 135 is necessarily carrying up at 140, even if he stopped Raleigh, because I don't even look at Raleigh as being a true 140 guy. I know he got that win against the older Ishmael Barboza, but yeah, it's a lot of smoke and mirrors when you got some of these 135ers operating at 140. But some of them I do think can have 140 success. Others, I'm not as sure. But yeah, 140, super talent-rich division. It's going to be interesting to see how they match make, not only for Arnold Barboza, the winner in this one, but also for Jack Catterall. And then before we go, I just want to make mention, Zelfa Barrett just lost to Jaza Dickens. This totally changes my opinion of Zelfa Barrett. I have long thought that he was one of the more underrated British fighters in the sport. I thought that he could be not only a champion, but I thought that maybe he was even like a potential top 3 to 5 guy in the division if he performs like he seems to perform when he's at his best. Like, I've seen him outbox Kiko Martinez. I saw him recently stop, Jordan Gill, who they were, kind of hyping up for a moment there. I saw him look really good against a prime Shavkat Rakhimov before he suffered what looked like an injury that led to a stoppage. And that was a big setback too, because I think that was for a vacant title. But even after that loss, I still thought that Zelfa Barrett was a near elite fighter. Not necessarily elite, but I thought that he was very, very talented. Like, you look at some of his counter uppercuts and his jabs, and when he's displaying some of his accurate hand speed and so forth, I thought that he was really good. But you can't be losing to Jaza Dickens and be an elite guy. You just can't. And look, that's no disrespect to Jaza Dickens. He's been in there with some of the best. Look, right before the pandemic, Jaza Dickens beat Lee Wood. But, I've seen Jaza Dickens lose to Kid Galahad via late stoppage. That was like one of Kid Galahad's title defenses. I've seen Jaza Dickens lose to a couple other guys. Several years ago, he got his jaw broken in the second round against Guillermo Rigondeaux. So, Jaza Dickens, he wins some and he loses some. He's beaten some decent guys, but usually when he's stepping up, like he's had a couple title opportunities, he loses those fights. So if you're trying to make your claim as one of the elite guys at 130, you don't lose to Jaza Dickens right now. So this was a huge setback for Zelfa Barrett. And props to Jaza Dickens. I think he's 33 years old. He's on a bit of a career resurgence. He had won 2 or 3 fights before this Zelfa Barrett fight. But I really thought that Zelfa Barrett was going to show out against Jaza Dickens. But Jaza Dickens, again, it's about filling in some of those blank spaces with good activity. Like when nobody's throwing a punch, throw that punch. Get it in there, right? It doesn't have to be a fight-changing punch. But trust me, I mean, if it scores, it's going to have some impact on the judging and on the opponent. So, yeah, I mean, he was taking craftier angles. He basically outboxed the guy who was supposed to be the better, more talented boxer, I would say boxer puncher between the two. So, yeah, props to Jaza Dickens, and I don't know what to say about Zelfa Barrett at this point. This was not the loss that you wanted to have. So, yeah, let me know your thoughts on all that in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.